This meeting of the Annexation and Zoning Committee to order. We're going to talk about proposed ordinance number 77-2021 about accepting the proposal of environmental design group to review the city's zoning code. Leslie, if we go forward, we'd have to do new legislation, right?
No,
We could still adopt
it will be the same number.
77, 2001, and 2002.
Oh, correct.
Okay,
Yes, yep,
I didn't know that.
yep. They can carry over.
So 18 years, I'm still learning. 19 now. All right. Who can tell us about what the history is of this proposal and what we believe it's necessary and appropriate? Because it's not an insignificant amount of money.
I can tell you how we got here today, how the beginnings of it and all of that. That's not noticed in the proposal. It's Bill was involved in this. In fact, initially got the proposal, and when the initial came, and I don't. It was our understanding that council was interested in looking at provisions of our zoning code, how the downtown study interacted. What issues were there in zoning code that affected downtown plan and vice versa. So it's my understanding, and I don't want to speak, my understanding, that's what prompted the proposal. When we initially got that proposal, the fee was actually almost twice what it is, what you see.
That was in March?
Yes. And at that time, we reached out. That's when I got more involved in trying to negotiate that fee down to something that we thought would give us the results of being able to address those issues that were what we believed council's concerns, but at the same time, like I said, the original proposal was almost twice what you see. So we negotiated that down quite a bit, obviously, and then this is what we have. But this wasn't anything from, like the zoning administrator or myself, service director. It was initiated by that's what we perceived.
Okay, so the first thing in the scope of services is a zoning code audit of existing downtown related zoning code. Do we have any concerns with our existing code? What are we gonna audit?
Mr. Hayna, may I join in for a second?
Sure.
So I believe I might have been the council member that brought this up as an idea when we were discussing with the original master plan. In my involvement in architecture and different types of developments in different communities, an issue that comes up when a master plan is done, oftentimes the code doesn't match the plan. And what that does is cause inconsistencies, which can then make it more difficult not only for bigger developers, but also for smaller local developers. And I had, from my experience in my own realm, which having looked at the zoning code a lot, I had noticed some inconsistencies with the density limits for residential in different parts of the downtown area. And I am not a professional to where I could analyze that and make sure it aligns with the master plan. But from my background, it seemed to make sense to double check that what we say we want to do matches with what we are actually allowing to happen by right in our community in this area.
Okay, so let's go back to the master plan. There are two parts of the master plan. The first part is a demographic study of our community. The second part of it is not a plan. It is a conceptual presentation of what could be developed in the city based upon the demographics in the first half of this. And, I think we made it very clear when we were looking at the master plan that even though the master plan shows, redoing Sodders, okay, Sodders Market, that was nothing that we were endorsing per se. We were just acknowledging that the demographics and environmental design group's assessment of what the market for grocery stores is today, that would be a consistent development. And when I looked at they had proposals for townhouses, for example, along Summit Street. And the demographics would support that. But we didn't suggest that we were going to impose townhouse zoning along Summit Street until there was a developer who came along and wanted to do that. So I'm a little, and I will tell you that if a developer came to us and wanted to develop a bunch of townhouses along Summit Street, I think I'd rather do a PUD than a zoning change. I'm not once we change the zoning, we lose control. We lose all control and review at that point. It's just, anybody who can meet the zoning can come in and do whatever they want to do. Do we have any folks proposing development in our downtown that have a concern with our current zoning? Right. I don't think so. I think, and these, weren't they called townhomes? What were they called? The row homes, zero lot line things. What were they called?
They were called townhouses.
Okay. Neat development idea. Really neat development idea. I don't want to write the zoning code now to accommodate an idea that, I don't know if there's any economic viability to it. Yeah.
Right, with environmental design, and I think it was in the back and forth between council and Michelle. And as Lindsay stated, some questions came up, and Michelle offered that part of the plans that she's done for other communities was an overhaul or look at the zoning. I think that's kind of where it came, and said, well, should we look to Michelle? It came, can you give us an estimate of what it would do? Sent that to the administration, and we kind of doctored it because it was a pretty big number, and we scaled it down to what we thought administratively, what if we were going to have her do this is what she should concentrate on. And I think that's just where we got to.
Mm-hmm.
I think there might be something to be said about Sylvania prides itself on being a business-friendly community, and I could see it being a deterrent if a developer wanted to do a fairly standard type of development, but it was not already a part of what our zoning code would allow to have to go through those extra steps. I could just see that being a challenge, and I'm also not saying we have to change anything right now, but I would like to have the knowledge to know where things may not be lining up the way we think they are, and to be able to know where a developer might end up saying something. I guess I'm trying to be prepared as opposed to being reactive, at least in our downtown, considering how many changes and interested parties there seem to be in it.
Does the inside the 5 development fit within our existing zoning? I assume it
Yes.
does.
I mean, and like we have the mayor here. With
I believe it does.
the
I think it does too. Yeah,
$1,000 audit higher zoning code, and I said, oh, don't need, but there were
Good.
issues that some people, some council members wanted to have, as Lindsay said, about our downtown zoning. And one of them, as I remember, is, can you have residential on the first floor or not? Downtown zoning, or B3. That's an issue. Maybe it has to do with the townhouses you're talking about. Huh? We had one council member that said, we never want to see another residential unit on the first floor. Well, but
it's currently permitted.
it's currently permitted, and it's in
Right.
the townhouse proposal, so I
Right,
don't
and
see a
if we-
problem with that.
And so if we wanted to make that change, I mean, we got a whole bunch of people in houses on Main Street.
No,
who live
they'd be
on-
grandfathered in anyway.
Yeah, they'd be grandfathered in, right?
Whether you can build those townhouses just have to do with street blocks downtown. Building is built. Council wants to say you cannot have an apartment building with a residence on the first floor. I've heard it both ways. I'm not sure which way is right. That's what I remember.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we went from $1,000 to up. Audit.
Mayor, there was also questions, if I recall, I think Cappellini at the time brought up the thought process that had needed to consider not allowing anything but retail on first floor spaces as well. And I certainly am no zoning code expert by any stretch, but I don't know what's allowed and what isn't allowed. But to me, a more fundamental question is what I've seen up to this point over the time that I've observed is that we have somebody who comes in whether it was SOMO or whatever, we put the parcels together for SOMO, but do we want to be proactive or we want to be in response back to somebody who comes in and develops? If we're going to market the space with the demographics that we have, do we need to have modifications of zoning or not? I don't know the answer to the question, but that to me is one of the things that was suggested by Michelle is that we go out and market the possibility of our demographics and let nature take its course, rather than allow somebody bring us something and then we react to it from there.
I remind council that created an entirely new zoning code category to allow SOMO to, we never would have had a residential zoning code that dense.
Right.
First
Right.
place. So in that case, because of the large size and the unexpected of that development, you created a zoning code to allow it to. That's not necessarily the best approach, but it did work.
Well, it allowed council to react to the specific proposal.
That one,
Right. Right. I mean, I'll admit to being kind of not kind of, I'm cautious about changing the zoning code in a vacuum without knowing what development wants to happen. You know, if I'm a little reluctant to foreclose our flexibility. I mean,
Mr. Hayden, also, I think, if I understood the conversation properly, the zoning code currently does allow for either first floor living or first floor retail. So in its current state, it meets at least that example. And it makes me think that I may need to take another look at the plan, right? To go back to refresh my memory on what the other primary issues of concern were. But I agree, there's flexibility, and good or bad, it's what we're used to dealing with is addressing people who have indicated interest in building in our community, and then addressing the special needs as they arise.
yeah, and I think we've been, as a council, I think we've been responsive to developers with ideas. You know, I mean, I've been, you know, we've had a number of developers over the years come up with ideas that required zoning plans, and Leslie has involved me in a number of those, you know. And we're responsive, we're not always compliant, but we've been responsive, I think. You know, we had, you know, I think about the proposal that we worked on last year about the art studios, which, you know, we kind of talked to the developer and about those options and about parking and, you know, what kind of things we'd kind of be looking for. And in that instance, we haven't heard about that in a while, but it wasn't because we weren't responsive. I mean, we were prompt and responsive.
But sometimes the goal is not change rules, but to have the discussion and have council be aware of what the rules are. Think about whether you want to make. We don't know whether I don't know whether residential on the first floor or not. I don't know whether it should be limited to retail, because we have some offices right across the street over here. So maybe it was continuing with Michelle, the process of learning and examining what's possible, and then deciding whether you wanted to make any change. I think that's probably where it really came.
I think that is correct, Mr. Mayor. I do think that this was part of that three-phase effort where we did approve phase 1 and phase 2. And as you're talking, I think this was,
Goal to up
it was to,
process.
and what are the opportunities? And
You already know what you want to do. We don't need to pay her $20,000.
Well, one
Mr.
option,
Hayden, I
yeah,
guess
go ahead.
I wasn't here for, Russell mentioned phase 1 and phase 2, but, you know, so reading this for the first time, I perceived it as a proposal to audit zoning, whether there's any recommendations that we could, I didn't take it as a proposal to change anything at this time.
Well, as I look at this scope of services, I don't think we're at a stage where we would want item C, for example. Consistent with the mayor's comments, you know, we might want to do A and B. A is a zoning code audit. B is a zoning code and development of best practices and current trends research. So, you know, we'd be like I said, continue, like you suggested, continuing study. We'd need some we need some client conference calls, and in-person meetings. That would be scope E. And I really think stakeholder and/or public engagement meetings we could maybe decide whether we want to do those later, along with the zoning code search. The zoning code writing and rewriting. After we're maybe know more about what the proposals are. So, would it be possible to go, I'm sure it is, we could go back to Environmental Design Group and see if they wanted to do A, B, D, and E initially, and that's, I don't know, 5, 7, 8, under $10,000. A more limited engagement.
We can certainly go back to them and see if that's acceptable. I would imagine that they're still gonna have some costs into, even though they're not actually writing, they're still gonna have some costs in viewing those sections and referencing as they make their recommendation. I don't think that we would completely eliminate.
Well, why don't we go back and talk with them?
That's a great suggestion, and I do understand what you're saying as well, Mr. Aller. No question that for them to be able to discuss with us what their recommendations are, they've had to put a lot of thought in and essentially done some of the writing already. So I get that.
I don't know if we need a motion, do we?
Would do one.
A motion to explore more limited scope of the proposal? All right, I'll second. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, move to adjourn
Second.
our zoning annexation. All in favor? Aye. Thank you.